Good evening. I'd like to welcome everyone, members, officers and members of the public to this meeting of the Planning Control Committee. Before the meeting starts, I'd like to invite the committee clerk, Susan Ledane, to explain how proceedings will work and to undertake a roll call of those attending online to ensure they can hear and be heard. Susan?
Okay. Good evening. Can I confirm the following officer is in attendance and can hear us and we can hear them? Justin Price-Jones?
Yes, I can hear you.
Lovely. Are there any other officers in attendance remotely? No. Okay. Rules of debate. If a member wishes to speak, they should use the speak button located on the microphone unit. The microphone unit will light up green and the chair will be alerted of your request to speak. When the chair invites you to speak, your microphone will be made live and will turn red, at which point you can speak. When the public participants are invited to speak, their microphones will be made live by the committee officer. When requested to vote, voting will be via the yes, no, abstain buttons on your microphone unit. Details of how members voted will be shown on the screens around the room and the result will be visible on the YouTube stream. In the event of a tied vote, the chair will have the casting vote. Are there any questions before we start the meeting? Back to you, Chair.
Thank you. Apologies for absence. I've received apologies from councillors Terry Tyler and Phil Weeder. Any further apologies? It's everybody, isn't there? Notification of other business, there is none. Chair's announcements, recording. In accordance with council policy, this meeting is being recorded. The recording will be available to view on the council's ModGov website or YouTube page. Declarations of interest. Members are reminded to make declarations of interest before an item. A detailed reminder about this and speaking rights is set out under Chair's announcements on the agenda. To clarify matters for the registered speakers, members of the public have 5 minutes for each group of speakers, supporters and objectors. There's a separate 5-minute time limit allocated to member advocates. A warning will be given at 4 minutes to alert you that you have 1 minute left. At 5 minutes, you'll be advised the time allowed has ended and the speaker will cease. Section 4.8.23a. The purpose of clarification. In order to vote on an agenda item at this meeting, a member must be present for the entirety of the debate and consideration of that item. If a member leaves the room at any point of the item, they'll not be able to vote. Remove an item. Item 5, 22/03040/FP has been withdrawn by the applicant so they can resolve the outstanding technical concerns with the LLFA. Public participation. Please can I confirm the following registered speakers are in attendance. Mr. Paul Atton, I have seen him. Oh, sorry. Item 5. This item has been withdrawn by the applicant so they can resolve outstanding technical concerns with the LLFA. Item 6, 23/01940/FP land at the south end of Anglian Business Park. Sean Greaves to present.
Thank you, Chair. This application is for a temporary change of use of vacant industrial land, and the temporary period is for 5 years, and the use is for use as a private car park to include construction of vehicle access, layout and hard surfaced area, security fencing and all ancillary works. Further information has been provided in the update, and that update basically sets out some certain questions that were asked of the applicant, and that's set out in the written note that you will have received. The application is recommended for conditional permission, as there is no objection to use of this brownfield site for car parking for a temporary period of 5 years. It is considered that the purpose would not prevent the site coming forward for housing in due course, The site is allocated for housing in the adopted local plan and has the benefit of an extant planning permission for housing. As set out in the addendum, the parking is to be used as contractor parking for the company who's going to build the new building and works at the nearby Johnson Matthey site. Hertfordshire Highways have objected to the application on the basis that they consider that all Johnson Matthey staff should be on their own site. The Highways Authority were made aware of the additional information clarifying that the parking will be for contractors who will build the permitted extensions and new buildings at the site. And the number of contractors is estimated to be 300, and the proposed parking is for 84 parking spaces. There's no planning reason, in our view, to support this highways objection, and therefore officers are recommending that planning permission be granted for a temporary period of 5 years. Could we start the presentation, please? The slides. Slide 1 is the site location plan, and as you can see, the site is to the south of Orchard Road, with access down to the site, which is immediately to the north of the railway line. There are industrial buildings to the west, to the west, and housing to the east. Next plan, please. So, yeah, thank you. That's the proposed layout plan. It shows a parking for 84 spaces, which includes some EV charging points, some spaces for disabled people and motorbike parking. There will be a 2.4 metre high security gate set into the site, which is sufficiently set back for HGVs to pull up, who may well be visiting the premises adjacent. And it shows proposed buffer landscaping around the site, which would also be retained for any future housing use when this permission expires, in the event that you've granted planning permission, that is, of course. Next slide, please. This is a photograph of existing parking next to the employment land, and the application site is to the left. It's the grassed area to the left of that photograph. Next slide, please. And this is a photograph of the site itself, looking towards the railway line to the south. You can just behind some scrub, the railway line, with the conifer trees beyond. Next slide, please. And this is the neighbouring industrial unit, which I believe is used for medical storage. Next slide, please. And this is the adjacent housing, flat housing in the form of flats immediately to the east of the site. I think that's the end of the slides, but thank you very much. And that's the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Are there any questions for Sean, this presentation? Councillor Levitt.
Taking 60 houses out of our allocation, how does it affect our 5-year land supply?
It would be a modest effect. There are viability issues with regards to the delivery of the housing, so the housing would not move forward in the near future in any event. There is utilities crossing the site, and the site is contaminated. And as things currently stand, the applicant has said at this particular point in time they would not be moving forward with housing because of viability issues. And the proposal would be, in our view, a good use of the site for a temporary period, pending, obviously, hopefully, improvement in the viability of the site moving forward for the delivery of housing.
Thank you, Councillor Pearce.
If permission is granted, would the applicant need to apply again for permission for housing on the site after 5 years?
The permission for housing will expire within the next year, I believe. So they would need to apply to effectively renew that permission in the future. Yes, the permission for there's already existing permission for storage on the site, which was granted in the knowledge that the housing was not viable at the current time. And this is an alternative to that open storage, car parking instead of open storage of the site. That planning permission, I believe, was granted earlier this year.
Any other questions? Councillor Boxon?
Thank you. I was just trying to think of it while you were talking. I've just thought about it. So let's say they have it for the 5 years. I know in the documentation they were talking about 3 years is what they would need. If they decide we're still not going to build any houses on it, what happens then? Because it is still a car park. Would it carry on being used as that, or is it? I mean, I know we've not lost the housing side of it, but anything going to happen to it that might be an issue?
This permission is for up to 5 years for the use as a car park. It's hoped that during that intervening period that they will come forward with a further application for housing. This temporary permission does not prevent the delivery of housing on the site. It's a temporary use. It doesn't involve any buildings that would prejudice the delivery of the housing. But we cannot obviously require people to implement their planning permissions when they get them, and some permissions never get implemented, of course. But we're hopeful that they will. If in the future that we find that housing is unlikely to become viable, we may well have to look at an alternative site as part of the local plan review, possibly. But that's just conjecture on my part.
Sorry, so we're not going to ask them after the 5 years to, well, if you're not going to build the houses, put it back to the scrubland it was. We don't need to do that.
No, there's no requirement to remove it's a gravel hard standing, so it's not even tarmac or anything like that. So it wouldn't take it's gravel within a kind of a mesh to stabilize the gravel. That kind of surface is used for temporary car parks and that kind of thing. National Trust used it on their sites, I've noticed. Extensions to permanent car parks often use this kind of material. So it wouldn't be any kind of permanent function in terms of the operational development on the land.
Councillor Allen?
Sorry. We are looking at a 5-year agreement when we have 3 years for the housing. Is there a particular reason we've gone for 5 years over just saying we'll give them 3 years?
The applicants has asked for 5 years. If members were only willing to give a 3-year permission, then the applicant has indicated that they would accept 3 years, because that's the anticipated period for the construction of the developments at Johnson Matthey site. However, there may well be delays, for example, in the construction at Johnson Matthey site. So they asked for 5 years to give themselves a little bit of leeway in that regard.
Thank you.
Councillor Levitt?
Yeah, last question really. 84 parking spaces, only 5 for EVs. Is that really enough considering the changes? And I know Johnson Matthey's own transport policy is to move to electric vehicles or non-fuel vehicles.
I think Johnson Matthey in that field of sustainability, aren't they? And achieving net zero and all that. As far as the number of EV charging points are concerned, we felt that was appropriate given the temporary nature of the development. It would, if we required more than that, that would be in requiring costs that probably would not be reasonable in relation to a temporary permission.
Okay.
If it was a permanent car park, then we'll be asking for a lot more EV charging points.
Any further questions? That's it. Can we go over to registered speakers, please? Mr. Paul Atton, applicant's agent speaking in support. When you're ready.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Greaves has very well summarised the application and the project, but I'll just give you a few points. That by way of background, the whole business park site is allocated for residential development in your local plan and has planning permission for housing. Unfortunately, in the present economic circumstances, we cannot press on with the approved residential development. The application site relates to vacant employment land at the southern end of the business park, presently sitting idle. So we are aware of national planning policy to reuse brownfield sites, along with local planning policy objectives to encourage business and local enterprise. In April this year, we obtained temporary planning permission to lay out and use the land for storage for a period of 5 years. And then our commercial agents then marketed the land to let. A prospective tenant came forward, a company called Wilson James, requiring temporary parking for its building contract with Johnson Matthey. The advice from your officers was that parking and storage are different uses, hence the need for further planning permission. So the proposed layout of the land is as per the recent storage use planning permission, with the same landscape buffers and the same access. The proposed entrance gates are set back as required by Hertfordshire Highways to enable HGVs to turn round outside of the gates. We spent quite a lot of time discussing the layout of those sort of that turning area so that lorries can, the previous application, so if the gates were closed, then lorries can sort of turn around outside the site at the end of the business park. So we were therefore surprised that the Highway Authority has now objected on the grounds of sustainability. It seems to us that using the vacant land for parking for a temporary period is highly sustainable. And as advised by officers, the project accords with your more recently adopted policy supporting business and enterprise. So in conclusion, Chair, we support your officer's recommendation of temporary permission subject to conditions as set out in the officer's report. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions, Mr. Atton? No? Can I come back to you then? Sean?
I've got nothing further to add to what Mr. Atton said, unless are there any other questions?
Any other questions? Shall we go to debate? Who would like to speak first? Councillor Levitt.
Just like to move the recommendation, Chair.
Do we have a seconder? Councillor Bloxham?
I'll second. Thank you.
No? Shall we have the debate? Councillor Nolan?
Yeah, just referring to the point in the letter the applicant has submitted around it being unviable at the moment to provide housing there. One of the points mentioned is the fact that it'd be costly to remediate the land given the contaminants there. I'm just trying to understand how then we're proposing to put further materials onto that site for a different use, which, given that it's potentially for some construction traffic, could cause further contaminants given the sort of traffic you'd expect to see at these locations with lorries and other things being there. And that somehow in a few years' time would come back and suddenly the land would be more viable for housing. I'm just trying to understand exactly how that point works, because it seems like we're making it more difficult in the future to make this land viable then for construction for housing, which is currently set out as and has active planning permission for, by placing more materials on top and potentially disturbing the land further. I may have missed something on that one, but I can't quite in my head get that one straight. It seems like we're making it less viable through the methods that are being employed to then return it to the use that we originally set it out for. I'm not sure there's a question there. I think it's just trying to, maybe it's just to understand what the process would be after this point, once the use had changed back again to make it viable again for the originally intended purpose.
Just that.
So, the proposal is for car park for cars. for construction workers. It's not for any HGV use, although HGVs would use the site if their extant planning permission for external outside storage were implemented. So this proposal may well cause less potential contamination of the site than the extant permission. Notwithstanding that, we don't believe that car parking itself will make a material difference to contamination of the land. And as Mr. Atton pointed out earlier, this is a small part of the site that is allocated for 60 houses. There are buildings, industrial buildings, etc., on the remainder of the site, and that I think is the main area of concern with regards to contamination rather than this part of the site necessarily. But that is something that we have considered, and we don't believe that it would make any particular material difference in that regard. And the proposal would comply with our policy on alternative use of employment sites, which criterion 4 does say would make use of a site that would otherwise be likely to become or remain vacant for a period of time. So this is, in our view, a viable use of a site that would otherwise just remain vacant.
Does that answer your question? Councillor Boxon.
I was really just going to add a little bit. I think what normally happens with contaminated land, it's the depth of it. So on this particular one, I'm imagining from what you said about putting the way that it's going to be constructed, that would only be a small surface that they'll take off and make it level. Whereas when it comes to any contaminated land, they've got to go way underneath that to make sure that they take it all away. So they just mop up what's already there. So I don't think it, like you, I would agree. I don't think it's going to have too much on it.
Other questions, please, or comments? So we've got a proposer and a seconder. Shall we go to the vote?
Chair, that motion is carried.
Thank you, Susan. Right, so item 7 is planning appeals. Sure.
Yeah, these items are obviously for information. We have 2 tables, basically. The first table, it relates to appeals that have been lodged since the last meeting, where appeals were reported. And there are 2 appeals that have been lodged. I would like to refer to the second appeal on that table, which relates to land west of Tuthill House, Kelshaw Tops, Thurfield. Members may recall that this application was reported with a recommendation for approval. However, members decided to refuse planning permission, and the application and the reason for refusal was that the application site is outside the settlement envelope of Thurfield, in a location designated as rural area beyond the Greenbelt, and that the proposed development therefore conflicts in principle with policies SP2, SP5 and CGB1 of the local plan, which seeks to focus new housing within defined settlement boundaries. As with all such cases, we have sent the report and the minutes to the Planning Inspectorate. And if members wish to make any further submissions in support of the resolution or the decision to refuse planning permission, then they are entitled to do so and invited to do so. And the deadline for such submissions is the 8th of November this year. So if you wish to make any submissions yourself, you may do so. So with regards to the appeal decisions, which is the next table, starting at page 45, we've had a an appeal that has been dismissed at 1 Purton Road in Hitchin. That was for a block of flats on the site of an existing house, and the inspector agreed that it would cause harm to the character appearance of the area, being out of context with the general character of dwelling houses rather than flats in the immediate vicinity. The next item, there is a correction. This was a committee item, not delegated. Members resolved to refuse planning permission. That has been allowed on appeal. The inspector came to the view that the site was an infill site based upon our criteria, and that it would not cause any harm to the character and appearance of the area. A summary is set out in that table. The appeal decision at 72 Lancaster Road was a split decision, and that reflected the original split decision of the council. We resolved to grant planning permission for a rear extension and roof lights, but to refuse planning permission for box dormers, and the inspector's decision reflected our decision. He dismissed the appeal for the box dormers and allowed permission for the appeal for the roof lights and single-story rear extension. And finally, we have an appeal decision to the rear of 23 Conquest Close, Hitchin. Members may recall that this was refused contrary to officer recommendation, and the inspectors agreed with the resolution or the decision of the committee that the proposal would cause harm to the character of the area and would have highway safety issues. So that's the update on appeal decisions. Thank you very much.
Questions? Councillor Allen?
Thank you very much for that. May I just ask, with reference to the land adjacent to Redbrick Cottage, the appeal was allowed, were there costs awarded against us?
No, there wasn't an application for costs, so there was no award of costs against us.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Right, so that report is for noting only. Item 8, S106 agreements.
There are a number of tables, 5 in all, that set out Section 106 obligations. Table 1 sets out new agreements that have been entered into since the 1st of April 2022, and that goes through to 31st of March 23. Table 2 basically sets out those agreements and what the contribution requirements are, that is contributions to this council rather than to Hertfordshire County Council. And Table 3 sets out the contributions that have been received up to March 23. Table 4 refers to those contributions that are currently held but are allocated towards certain obligations, certain contributions. And finally, Table 5 is contributions that are available but have not been allocated to any particular project yet. So there's a fair amount of information there. And if any members have any particular questions about any of those, then they can email me and I will obtain the necessary detailed information regarding any of those projects. Thank you very much.
Any questions or comments for this meeting? Again, the report is for noting only. Item 9, current enforcement notice. Sean to present.
This is this table, item 9, is basically a list of enforcement items that have been dealt with, and where authorized, or where action has been authorized, and where there's been what has resorted as a result of the issue of enforcement notices. It's an item of information. Several of the items that was the result of an appeal, and one was dismissed and one was allowed. So that's a table showing six enforcement notices that were issued. Thank you.
Any questions for Sean on that? No. That report is for noting only. Item 10, exclusion of press and public. I propose that under section 100A of the Local Government Act 1972, the press and public be excluded from the meeting on the grounds that the following report will involve the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraphs 5 and 7 of Part 1 of Schedule 12A of the said Act as amended. Can I have a seconder, please?
Happy to second that.
Thank you. Can we have a vote?
Yeah, that motion is carried.
Thank you. So item 11, current enforcement act.
YouTube.
Oh, sorry. We're back now into part 1, and that's the end of the business today. So I'm closing the meeting at 8:04 and 41 seconds. The next meeting is on the 16th of November. Thank you.
Thank you.